Good evening. Welcome, everyone. I'm Allison Bell, the Executive Director here at the Heritage Society, and we welcome all of you for Women's Equality Day on the day of. This is a wonderful celebration, and we are honored to host so many passionate advocates, historians, community leaders, and friends who believe in the power of equality and the stories that inspire change. Each year, we are honored to open our doors for a free evening of panel discussions as an opportunity for everyone to engage with the stories of Houston's suffrage pioneers and modern change makers. Tonight, you'll experience those very stories firsthand, the visionary activists who secured voting rights, the grassroots organizers who carried their torch, and the contemporary leaders advancing parity in every field. Our Women's Equality Day tonight celebration brings together the University of Houston History Department, the Houston History Magazine, and the League of Women Voters to spotlight the 1977 National Women's Conference and share archival discoveries that resonate with today's fight for equality. On this day, we also pause to recognize why it matters. Women's Equality Day marks the anniversary of the 19th Amendment, certification in 1920, a turning point that granted American women the right to vote. Did you know that the Heritage Society was founded by a majority of women? Names such as Ima Hogg, Faith Bybee, Marie Lee Phelps, and Ellen Wilkerson. And our board today consists of the majority of women on our board, and we have a board member here tonight. Martha, where are you? Martha Whiting Goddard is one of our board members, and she's also a Yates descendant, so she has brought in that wonderful story that we tell from plantation to emancipation. I invite you to explore our year-round offerings. Join our women's history tours every month at Sam Houston Park. We have 3 restored historic homes that tell the stories of Texas women from the 1800s to the mid-1900s. So whether you're curious about early property rights, the rise of women in Houston's art scene, or the role of women educators, our guides bring these narratives to life. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our partners for this annual celebration. Sharice Story, the Vice President of Voter Services from the League of Women Voters. Come on up.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just a little shorter than her, so let me adjust for a moment. So I am Sharice Story, the Vice President for Voter Services with the League of Women Voters of Houston, and the League is delighted to participate in the Heritage Society's celebration of Women's Equality Day alongside the University of Houston's Center for Public History. It's an honor to stand here with all of you and for the launch of the latest issue of the Houston History Magazine, and to remember one of the most significant moments in our city's history, the 1977 National Women's Conference. So why does August 26th matter? Women's Equality Day marks the anniversary of the adoption of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which granted women the right to vote. The day exists because of the law championed in 1971 by Congresswoman Bella Abzug, who, as fate would have it, also chaired the 1977 conference right here in Houston, Texas. The 19th Amendment was a milestone, but not the finish line. Women's Equality Day stands as both a celebration and a reminder that the fight for equality continues. So in November 1977, Houston became the epicenter of a national conversation on women's rights. Over 2,000 delegates and about 20,000 other observers filled the Sam Houston Coliseum for the first time, and as far as we know, and so far it's the only time that we had a federally funded national women's conference. The torch was carried from Seneca Falls, New York, the site of the 1848 conference, the Women's Rights Convention in 1848, linking the historic gatherings across the country. And so delegates came from every state and territory, representing political parties from left to right, from grassroots activists to First Ladies Rosalind Carter, Betty Ford, and Lady Bird Johnson. And yes, Houston's own Barbara Jordan, former representative of the 18th Congressional District, stood at the podium and delivered a keynote speech that still brings us chills. She urged everyone to reason together, to seek common ground despite our deep divisions, and those words ring true today. The delegates debated and adopted a national plan of action with 26 planks on everything from equal rights amendments, reproductive freedom and child care, to economic equality, education, the rights of minority and disabled women, and an end to the violence against women. And these weren't just abstract ideas, these were actionable demands, a roadmap for equality. But the conference wasn't just speeches and votes. It was also a visual feast, a vibrant display of creativity and conviction. With so many voices to be heard and so little time at the microphones, the participants had to turn to another way to express their thoughts. So they made their beliefs visible through buttons and hats and banners and signs that became their microphones when they could not step up to a microphone to speak. And so those were ways that they were able to break into the political sphere. And so this conference was about the visual presence as much as it was about the debates on the floor. So here in Houston, we had a local print shop owner, Marion Coleman, and her House of Coleman team produced a glossy 78-page program for the conference, mixing the schedule along with historic suffrage photographs. And so for supporters of the Equal Rights Amendment, the rallying cry was ERA, yes. And delegates from Texas plastered their section markers with stickers. And one of the delegates from Maryland, Betty Hamburger, wore a hard hat reading pro-God, pro-family, pro-ERA, which is a bold statement with the rejection of the idea that women's rights and family values were mutually exclusive. So why does this matter now? These sites remind us that political movements are not just shaped by policy papers or speeches, but by everyday people who show up, create, and make their voices seen as well as heard. So when we look back from 2025, we see both progress and unfinished business. The Equal Rights Amendment, though it was debated fiercely in 1977, is still not a part of our Constitution. And we still have many of the same issues: pay equality, pay equity that is, reproductive autonomy, representation and leadership, and these things remain in the center of debate. But that's why today's launch of Houston's History Magazine's special issue on the 1977 National Women's Conference is so exciting. If this issue doesn't just chronicle the event, it preserves the sights, sounds, and voices that shaped it. It reminds us that Houston was not just the host city, we were a catalyst. Barbara Jordan, Bella Abzug, Coretta Scott King, Maya Angelou, their presence here told the world that this city could lead a national movement. So as we mark Women's Equality Day, let me honor those who carried that torch, both literally and figuratively, to Houston in 1977. Let us remember the courage it took to stand on the stage, to speak one's truth, to stitch a slogan, lift a banner high enough for the world to see, and let us be inspired to pick up where they left off, because the fight for equality did not end in 1920 or in 1977, and it will not end until every person enjoys full and equal rights. So I thank you, and please enjoy exploring the Houston History Magazine issue that keeps this vital chapter of Houston's history active and alive. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Nancy Beck Young, and I'm the director of the Center for Public History, and we are so proud to have this launch event tonight. And I would like now to introduce the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, Dr. Dan O'Connor. Dr. O'Connor is a specialist in health and human performance, a specialist in spreadsheets, and an amazing dean.
Depends on who you ask. So thank you, Nancy, and thank you to the Heritage Society for hosting this event. And we have another, unrelated to this event, that's a U of H entity also, Center for Mexican American Latino Studies. It's an interactive board that shows you the Latino art around Houston. So if you have a chance, go interact with it. It's a touch screen. But as we've been talking about, we're here to celebrate the launch of this issue of the magazine about the 1977 National Women's Conference. It makes sense that Houston, U of H is the place to celebrate this and to publish the magazine since it was in Houston. We're the public R1 in the city. And this is the magazine that's the arm of the Center for Public History and the Welcome Wilson Center. So all that sort of comes together after almost 50 years in a really nice way. Nancy and Leandra, who are here, and is Peggy Linder here? They're the PIs of an NEH grant that also investigated the Women's Conference in 1977. They did a project that lasted several years, and there's an online site, and I'm sure there's a link to it in the magazine. So this is not only just a magazine, there's a lot of other interactive stuff, and I encourage you to look at that. But I just want to say this, I think, is one of the great examples we have in the college of something that a lot of parts come together to make a really great thing. Some of the parts are the Center for Public History itself and the U of H Sharing Stories team. They were really instrumental to this, but also the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences writ large, the Department of History, the Institute for Research on Gender, Women, and Sexuality, and the director, Elizabeth Gregory, is with us tonight here in the audience. The Division of Technology was part of the project because a lot of digital humanity methods were used in investigating this to put together all those visual and auditory elements in addition to the documentary records. And UH Libraries, and the Dean of Libraries is here, Christina Gola. So there's a lot of people that put a lot of work into culminating into this magazine. And there's a lot more information out there, and history will be preserved because of all that work. It goes without saying that the students were involved. We have some of our wonderful students. The best thing about U of H is our students. They wrote articles in this magazine. Which I think it was grad students writing articles, is that right? But we also had 2,000 undergrads along the way working on the project.
We're up to 3,000.
Up to 3,000. She likes to correct me. That's a big number. So this is, again, something that shows really what a public institution can do. It's not only about the research we're doing and advancing our careers and knowledge base, but engaging the community, hopefully in a real and valuable way to mutually benefit everyone. So it's an example of what's the value of higher ed. It's something like this that we're seeing tonight. But thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you, Dan. So welcome from the UH Center for Public History. At the Center for Public History, our mission is to ignite an understanding of our diverse pasts by collaborating with and training historically minded students, practitioners, and the public through community-driven programming and scholarship. Since 1984, we have created collaborative research projects with university and community partners to generate research that is local and global. As public historians, we are committed to doing history for and with the communities of which we are a part. We do this in 3 ways. First, we train graduate and undergraduate students in public history methods, values, and ethics, and prepare them for careers in the public humanities. Second, through public-facing projects like Houston History Magazine and sharing stories from 1977, scholars, students, and community members work together to document our rich histories. And third, through public programming under the CPH Lecture Series, we strive to make history matter in Houston by sponsoring lectures, workshops, discussions, seminars, and film screenings, such as the Spring Lily event co-sponsored with Donna Cole. I saw you a minute ago, Donna, that speak to the value of the humanities. We are delighted to mark the latest issue of Houston History Magazine, The Spirit of Houston, 1977 National Women's Conference, as we approach the 50th anniversary. And I'd like to now introduce the moderator for this evening's panel. Joy Sewing is an award-winning journalist and community activist. After almost 20 years with the Houston Chronicle in 1923, she became the paper's first black news columnist in its 122-year history. She writes about social justice, politics, race, education, healthcare, and inequity issues, often through a historical lens. Joy, it's your turn.
Thank you. And I'll try to speak as loudly as I can.
I think we have a mic down here. Maybe.
Oh, there's a mic.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there's a
Oh,
mic.
good.
Is it on?
Oh,
Okay. We'll use the one that's working. How about that? Yeah.
oh, okay. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is a wonderful opportunity for me to learn so much about our history that I did not know about. And first of all, if I cough or sneeze, I do not have COVID. I have a sinus infection. Just bear with me, okay? And I'm also a U of H grad, so I'm happy to be here. I want to thank the Houston History Magazine and University of Houston and the Heritage Society for having me and for hosting this wonderful event. I'll be honest, when I got the request to moderate this panel, I wasn't really aware of the conference. And I am embarrassed by that because I graduated from the University of Houston. I am a Houston native, and I'm not a spring chicken. So I thought, and I did a deep dive into the magazine, as you can see by my highlighted, okay? I really studied the magazine and learned so much and got to talking with even colleagues in the newsroom who weren't aware of this. And I think at this stage, as a journalist, it is so important to be able to share stories currently through the lens of history and to educate our readers and educate other people about what has transpired, because people don't know. A lot of people that I've talked with did not know Houston had played such a pivotal role in such important time, and I'm proud to say I'm a Houstonian because of that. I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have on my far right Poppy Northcutt. Poppy played a critical role in organizing the conference in just 6 weeks, which is pretty amazing. And this is before social media and calling it emails, right? It was a monumental task with 20,000 people coming together into Houston. Prior to that, she became the first female engineer in mission control at NASA and the first women's advocate for the city of Houston. Next, we have Josephine Lee. Josephine has worked in education and community organizing and is now a staff writer for Texas Observer. She reports on labor, environment, politics, and education, including many of the same issues raised by women during the 1977 National Women's Conference. Linda Garcia Merchant is an activist, author, and filmmaker who has documented decades of Chicana activism. She is the director of the U of H Digital Humanities Core Facility and co-founder of Chicana por Mi Raza Digital Memory Collective, which preserves Chicanx and Latinx history. And Caitlin Jones. Caitlin was guest editor of the National Women's Conference magazine. Her dissertation and soon-to-be book examines the national forgetting of the conference in women's history. She is currently a fellow at the National Park Service Belmont Paul House in Washington, D.C. I'm going to jump into the questions, and Poppy, I have the first one for you.
I'm ready.
Okay. What made Houston the right place for this historic gathering, and what were some of the biggest challenges in preparing for such a historical event?
Well, what made us the place to go? I mean, first of all, geography is always important. And we were the first and I guess still the only southern state that ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. But also, way before that, well, not way before it, but going all the way back to earlier, we had been a place that had been a hub for women's rights activities. We had had a national conference here for the National Organization for Women. Before this, we had had the first national conference for the National Women's Political Caucus was here in Houston. There had been a very important National Women's Latino Conference here in Houston. For some reason, people like to come to Houston, okay? Geography was important, as I said, being a southern state, and I think nationally, the commission, when they were picking the site, thought it was important to try to go where they needed to go, okay? Go somewhere that would be supportive, but also be a good place for people in unratified states to go. You know, and to emphasize that this was not just a West Coast or an East Coast phenomenon that was going on in terms of women's rights. We had also had a women's advocate, that was me, in Houston, which indicated that the city was committed to equal rights. We had a very active women's rights community here. And I also think in terms of the state that it wasn't just that we had ratified very early, we had ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. We were the 5th state that ratified, and we would have been the first if our legislature had been in session, okay? And we ratified handily. And you know why we ratified handily? Because in November of 1972, the Equal Rights Amendment federally came down in 73, but just a few months before that, the people of Texas voted 4-1 to ratify a state equal legal rights amendment. We couldn't get it through the legislature today. But the people of Texas voted 4-1. I mean, the overwhelming majority. That was a really impressive number. And you know, that meant that when those legislatures came, whenever it came out of Congress, the ERA came out of Congress, the Texas legislators knew what Texas wanted. Very different situation that we have right now. But we had an amenable state government. You know, we had an international airport, so we had lots of hotel space. We had, you know, basically the things that you need to host a successful conference. So, you know, we were thrilled and happy to have it coming to Houston. As to the challenges, well, 6 weeks to put it together. Absolutely. That was a hell of a challenge, okay? And the reason we had 6 weeks to put it together was Bella's staff, okay, Bella Abzug was running for mayor of New York at the time. And her staff was preoccupied with her mayoral campaign, not with being here in Houston doing the nitty-gritty on-the-ground stuff. So we were brought on board, Helen Cassidy and I were brought on board very late in the game. And the reason we were brought on board is because we had put together the National Women's Political Caucus Conference. We had put together the National Conference. We knew the people at the convention center, and we were feminists. So we had to muster a huge number of volunteers very quickly. And fortunately, the Houston community is very supportive in terms of its volunteer community. We had women from all walks of life. We had some men too, okay? Stepping up and being volunteers. Mechanically, the old convention center was a nightmare. It was just a nightmare. And they had not booked any move-in time. You're doing a big convention, you need move-in time. And I can't think of the guy's name that ran wrestling here in Houston, but he had the Coliseum and a wrestling match the night before.
Oh, wow.
He was nice enough, he didn't have to, but he was nice enough to let us come in and do some stuff, okay? Which was very thankful, but we had to do a midnight setup. The kind of setup that people usually take a lot of time to do. We did a midnight setup, and I in particular was in charge of the midnight setup. So when the torch came in, I was barely awake. I don't know much of anything that happened the first day, other than the torch made it and we opened. And we had microphones, and we had chairs, and we had a big woman banner proclaiming to the world what we were all about.
Okay, Linda, and I apologize for coughing. The conference brought together women from across racial, ethnic, and political lines. How did that diversity shape the conversations and resolutions, and what lessons can we draw from it today?
So I've got notes, because actually I remember some of it. So what's often lost in history about social movement is the scale at which it occurs. 2,000 delegates, 20,000 observers from 56 states and territories. And when you think that Guam, which is like 7,500 miles away, and a few time zones from Houston, had a delegation, that's scale. That's huge, right? So when you think that so many of the women were like my own mother, who was a commissioner, older, like more than half of the demographic of that convention was over 50. My mother was 51. And we're actively involved in national and local politics. My mother, at the time, was senior staff for a mayoral candidate in Chicago, we're originally from Chicago, Roman Kuczynski. And so she always told the story about when she got the call to be a commissioner, somebody yelled into the room they were all working in that there was a call for Rhea from the White House. And Kuczynski turns to all the staffers and says, see, I only pick top tier advisors to work on my campaigns. There were so many, I think the other thing that gets lost is that there were so many BIPOC women in roles of national prominence, like Audrey Rowe Colon, who was, I think, the outgoing chairperson of the National Women's Political Caucus at that point. Addie Wyatt, also worked in Chicago, who, like my mom, was a Chicagoan and a nationally recognized labor organizer, and who was also a founding member of NOW, which I didn't know when I was looking at, I didn't know that about her. The other thing is how many of the women commissioned were women of color. Audrey was one. There were 3 Latina commissioners, and that was always my focus. 2 of them were Chicanas, 1 was Puerto Rican. So Rhea Mojica Hammer and Cecilia Preciado Burciaga and Carmen Vota all came from nationally recognized platforms. Rhea was the former vice chair of the National Women's Political Caucus and was the present chair of the Chicana caucus of the NWPC, the National Women's Political Caucus. Cecilia was the assistant vice provost of faculty affairs at Stanford and the highest ranking Latino at the university. Carmen Vota was president of the National Conference of Puerto Rican Women. And both Carmen and Cecilia, after IWI went on to be members of President Carter's National Advisory Council. And so, for a very long time, this whole thing happens, I want to say 2009-ish. I go to a commemoration of this. the IWI. It was in New York City. It was a great event, but I knew, because I had attended this particular conference, how many Latinas were in attendance and were vocal and were mad as heck about a whole bunch of things. And to just sort of witness that and the impact of the minority women, not just on the minority agenda, but on so many other issues, I knew that there was such a history there, and to see 35 years later that that history was missing broke my heart. I still get emotional about this. So I was very good friends with my mother's friend, Martha Godera, who's very famous in Texas politics and very famous in Texas, period, mother of Chicana feminism. And her daughter was working at Michigan at the time, and I had already made a film about my mother and the caucus and the NWPC, and we had taken it around the country, and the first question was always, why don't we know this history, right? And my mother said, well, now you do, and now you need to share it yourselves, right? And so Maria and I got together and said, we gotta do something. And that's how Chicana por Vida was born. We began collecting oral histories of second wave feminists from across the country that are Chicanas and Latinas, because at that point in our history, young women were coming to me, even women from my family, saying, well, I'm not a feminist. And I would say to them, you own a bank account and a credit card and a cell phone. You're a feminist, whether you want to be or not, because you're financially independent. And so, and then I would tell them this whole story. We began collecting, working with students, not unlike sharing stories, very similar model. Well, here's the big difference, we didn't have any money. And so, because we were constantly having to convince people that this history was real and important and had occurred with our own mothers and with, you know, thousands of other women. I will say that ERA passes in Texas because of Chicanas. I mean, they are very influential in that fight and that political activism to get that right. That's like a proud moment for Martha Godera that ERA passes in Texas because of the work of the women of the Raza Unida party, also very active in Texas. So, you know, the fact that there is the Chicana conference in '71, the fact that there are the Hermanas, which are the Latina nuns, that conference not too long after that, the fact that I think the brothers also meet in Houston, all of these things happen in Houston and are part of this rich, rich history. Yeah, my mom gets elected as first vice chair to the NWPC at that first conference. And so in Houston, so Houston has this huge history that nobody knows about. And because, yeah, Houston is this home where so much activism can happen and that people believe in. The other thing I was going to say about this is, so the women's conference doesn't happen in a vacuum, as the woman from the league that you mentioned. It starts way before that. Martha always says that it actually for her starts when she recognizes there's a difference between little boys and little girls, and that it's biological and little else. So she, very much like my own mother, had to learn feminism and unlearn some of the nature of oppressive behaviors. For me, it's a native experience. My mother, I grew up always knowing that I should have equity and be fairly treated. And that, I would say, is for me the big lesson, the biggest takeaway, is the ability to tell these stories and the ability to tell these single stories about all of these women that we've interviewed. So we've interviewed to date 125 women and have collected 21,000 documents. And so it's the largest collection of Chicana feminist materials in the world. Okay, so.
This is for Caitlin. There were definitely conflicts, political divides, differing agendas, and competing visions of feminism. How were those tensions navigated in the conference?
Today there are feminisms. In 1977, there were feminisms. And organizers of this conference knew that this couldn't be, and it shouldn't be, a rubber stamp convention, this, idea that there was one way to do this and that it was going to be just you had an agenda and we were going to follow it. And so a lot of the ideas about what was going to be talked about, what was going to be debated, happened at state meetings over the summer. So every state and territory in the United States had a meeting where they had workshops, where they hammered out resolutions, where they elected their delegates. And this is kind of where the idea of feminisms is hashed out. So you even have, talking about someone like Audrey Rowe-Colomb, who is a black Republican. She is a moderate woman, but you also, at the same time, have someone like Barbara Smith from Massachusetts, who's the founder of the Combahee River Collective, which is a black radical feminist organization that kind of talks about intersectionality before that's a term. And so there was an idea of, okay, is the way through change government, or is it grassroots? And a lot of this is happening at the state meetings. And just as there were competing visions of feminism, there were people who were totally opposed to feminism, and you wanted them to have their say too, whether whether you agreed with them or not. And so in electing the delegates, conservative right-wing women from Mississippi and Utah, they were savvy people. They organized and they got people there and they got their slates elected. So you do have this representation of people who are opposed to a lot of the issues that are being discussed that still have their voices heard. At the same time, you have delegates in California who work really, really hard to make sure that lesbian voices are included in something like this. So you have to make sure that everybody is heard, and I think the organizers, as big as this conference was, they tried their best to do that. In Houston, they would debate the different planks. They would let speakers come up who were for and against, the microphones. People tried to grab the microphones, and Bobby told them, okay, if someone tries to grab the microphone, just stick it between your legs so they won't grab it.
I have to give credit to someone else for that. That was really our security head. Was an activist that had been a farm worker, okay? She had been through all the farm worker stuff, okay? Her name was Barbara Saganero, okay? And Barbara was tough. She knew about resisting, okay? So she's the one who came up with the idea. Whenever the microphone, you hold the microphone, you never give it to them, you hold it with both hands, okay? And when it's not in use, you put it in your crotch and you squat down.
Yeah, so all of these women, they followed Robert's Rules of Order. They allowed, some amendments to be made to some planks. Most famously, there was an amendment to what was called the Minority Women's Plank. BIPOC women decided when they got there that was not good enough. They did not feel represented by this plank, and so they worked all night through different sessions, talking about what they needed and what they wanted the government to do for them. And that was, read in a very dramatic and emotional fashion. Latino women, Asian American women, Native American women, and Black women all came together. And, most historians mark this as the first time the phrase women of color is used to denote the fact that women of color are different and they have different experiences, but they're working together and they face similar experiences of discrimination as well. So it became a really important organizing term that comes out of this. So there's moments of compromise, there's moments of tension, but ultimately they passed this plan that's, many of which the planks are still good today.
This is sort of my area in terms of media coverage. So how was the conference, and this is for Caitlin and Josephine, how was the conference covered at the time? And we know that there were probably majority men covering, right? And what role did the media play in shaping or distorting public understanding of it? More generally, how effectively does the media today cover social movements?
This was a big deal. There were 1,500 reporters who came to Houston. Organizers, I think, I looked at their press list, they maybe budgeted for 500. Every broadcast network broadcast their morning shows live from Houston. I believe Meet the Press was live in Houston. And most of the reporters, from my own research, were women.
Really?
Yes. So, you know, you have from national to local outlets, you have mostly women covering this, and that's for two reasons. Women had been covering the women's movement for years, and so they knew the people, they knew what to look for, they knew who to talk to. But then also a lot of, you know, in the early days of mass organizing, a lot of radical feminists wouldn't talk to male reporters. They were like, we're only going to talk to women, and so male editors sent their women reporters. But women reporters, many of them were active in feminist issues in their own newsrooms, and they were personally, they felt personally close to a lot of these issues, and they supported them personally. But publicly, you know, there's this, you know, idea of journalistic objectivity, of balance at this time. Whether objectivity exists is a different story. But the editors, you know, wanted to see both sides of this issue. And again, conservative women, they were savvy organizers. They gave them the both sides. They were very, very vocal about opposing this conference. They even organized a counter protest at the Astro Hall, where about 10 to 15,000 people showed up. And so the media had their both sides. But if you look at a broader scope of the media outside of, you know, national organizations and look at local organizations, they were following around their delegates. So the national media kind of boiled it down to, okay, it's the ERA, it's abortion, it's lesbian rights. That's kind of what happened in Houston. But if you look at local papers, like for instance in Arizona, all of those women were talking about things like Medicaid expansion. So if you look at the local level, you see a more granular idea of what women were worried about, what they were talking about at Houston, away from all of these big national cameras. And then also it was a story for everyone. All different types of American women were represented, and so all different types of outlets came. You had you know, racial and ethnic publications, you had LGBTQ publications, radical feminist outlets, radical right outlets, conservative, socialist, whatever. Everybody was at Houston. And so it kind of gives you a glimpse into some of the media polarization that we see today. Just to give you an example, Ms. Magazine called Houston 4 Days That Changed the World, whereas the National Review, a conservative publication, called it a 4-day hen session. So you're getting different perspectives depending on what you read and what you're reviewing about what Houston was, and I think that's part of some of the distortion that came out of it is no one really knew what Houston was depending on what you were seeing, what channel you viewed, what publication you read. There were a lot of different ideas of what Houston meant.
I don't have too much more to add. I can just answer the second part of that question. Is about how media covers social movements today. As a reporter for the Texas Observer, all I can say is that we need to do more of it. A lot of times, you know, I mean, these are trying times, you know, and so we look at the news and there's a lot of doom and gloom, and I think we don't do enough as reporters to focus on, you know, fighting examples, and I think that needs to be done more when protests are covered. They're covered a lot of times on the surface level, what's happening on the day of, instead of going into the stories of what brought people there. And a lot of times you're not going to find like days-long conferences like the Women's Conference, you know, in 1977. And so I think as reporters we need to do a better job of getting into people's stories, what brought them to the protests in the first place, you know, what issues they're going through. So I think there needs to be that more in-depth coverage that we all need to strive for as journalists.
This is for Poppy and Linda. What concrete changes, locally or nationally, can be traced back to the resolutions and activism that came out of the conference?
Well, if you're talking locally and in Texas, I think that really there's not so much in terms of policy that came from that, because those policy changes were part of the reason why the conference came to Houston in the first place. Because we had already adopted the state Equal Rights Amendment, we had made a huge number of changes statewide in our laws. We had made changes to credit, equal credit. We had made changes in terms of custody, domestic relations kinds of things. We had made a lot of those changes in our laws, okay? And at least nominally, they were on the books. Now, nominally, for example, the legislature passed a law that rape victims, rape kits were to be paid for by the police department. Can you believe that before they had a law about that rape victims had to pay for their own rape kits? Yes. Okay. But we had passed a lot of those laws in the wake of the passage of the Texas Equal Legal Rights Amendment. I think that the biggest change that came, not just here, but really everywhere, was in the number of women who ran for office. And the amount of money they were able to raise, the amount of credible campaigns they were able to put on, and the number of them that were successful. And that was true for the conservative women benefited from that. I mean, the women across the spectrum started running for office where they had not run before. And that, to me, was the biggest change.
So excuse me. So I would say one of the outside of financial independence, I think that's probably the biggest thing, especially for this generation, to understand that what financial independence actually means, and how important it is to have as part of your identity formation. I mean, it's like I can't show that. I think one of the other things that comes out of this that we all have and is now really experiencing serious challenge are the number of ethnic studies and women and gender studies programs that occur because, and my mom always said that, my mother always said this, that we marched in the streets and we went to the legislature to make sure that those line items began to exist so that these departments could appear and exist and educate, help us to begin to create the scholarship around the importance of women's contributions. And so I think that is probably the biggest thing to come out for me. That's the biggest thing, because that seems to have the most influence on this generation now, what, 2 generations removed from that moment, who may or may not know this history, but have benefited and recognize that they are indeed benefiting from it. So, yeah, I would say that.
Okay, this question is for everyone. We've lost so much ground in the last few years with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, an attack on DEI and voting rights. Where do we go from here?
I'll just speak from my reporting and organizing experience, but unfortunately women are still facing a lot of the same problems today that they were fighting back in 1977. We're back in this place where we're still fighting for reproductive freedom, right? After the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and during his short time in office, Trump has already worked to defund Planned Parenthood, other reproductive health centers. He's rolled back protections under the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act to provide life-saving abortion care to pregnant women whose lives are at risk during labor, and is pushing to ban the abortion pill nationwide. And in Texas, this past legislative session, the state legislature passed SB 3, which limits financial assistance to women who travel out of state for abortions, and is currently attempting to pass legislation during this special session that would restrict access to abortion pills by allowing private citizens to sue anyone who manufactures, distributes, mails, or provides abortion medication to and from Texas. And so, it wasn't only the overturning of Roe versus Wade, that was just the beginning, right, of these regressive policies that we're seeing. And I think I'm partly answering another question that we had prepared for too, but just as the similar problems that we're still facing today, rural and low-income women, we saw how the OBBA, or the Big Beautiful Act, axed Medicaid and the ACA, the rates of uninsured will go up. Maternal health care is often one of the first services to go in cash-strapped hospitals, and already there are, I think, about 26% of our counties in Texas, or no, actually 46% of our counties that are defined as maternity care deserts already. And so we're just gonna see another hit, in our healthcare access. We've also seen the attacks against trans members of our community surge in the past few years. So, Trump's orders have prohibited trans people from using gender markers that reflect their identities on official documents. He's turned the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Ed into a tool to hunt for schools that provide safe spaces for trans children. And so a lot of these issues, and low-income women of color are still facing multiple levels of inequality in the workplace and community. So we're still fighting a lot of these same issues, but I think, speaking from my organizing experience, I organized in the Lower East Side and Chinatown community in New York City among Asian American, Black, and Latina working people, and I can only speak to my experience in that setting, and also here a little bit when I first moved here. And while we still have reached we have not reached equal representation in our electoral offices in the workplace. One of the progress that we have seen is that there are more women in political offices. There are more women as CEOs in Fortune 500 companies. But then in my organizing experience, we've had to really think about why are we still facing health, housing, and workplace conditions? Why are they still worsening for the majority of women when there are women in these positions of power? And I think that's the conflict that Caitlin was kind of referring to earlier, in all these different conflicts in the Women's Conference. And so in my organizing spheres, I organize nail salon workers, female nail salon workers who are facing toxic health conditions and wage theft, but oftentimes they had a female boss, right? And then I organized families against housing community displacement, but we were also fighting against a city council member who was a Chinese female, right? Who worked in the interest of her real estate donors, right? And then, I organized home care attendants who fought against, they were working 24 hours a day, only being paid 13 for 13 of those hours. And recently the New York City City Council speaker, who's a Black woman, have refused to ban the 24-hour workday in New York City, right? So I think we need to be asking these hard questions about the contradictions and the limitations of representational politics, too, and if that is the only strategy, right, to transform, right, our communities. And I think we need to come to a reckoning of that. In our organizing experience, low-income women of color often rose as the leaders of the movement, but they didn't just fight to be equal to other men, right, or equal to white women, because they're also oppressed too. They're also lacking rights, and more so under this society. And so, but because low-income women of color face more levels of oppression and face more barriers to equality, they often felt like they had less to lose and more to gain in speaking up and fighting. So they led others in the community in the fight to protect their communities, their housing, their schools against displacement, to improve conditions in the workplace, to increase access to health care. And so these issues were no longer just women's issues or women of color's issues, or they weren't desperate issues, but that only affected a group of people, but they led others to see that others had a stake in these issues, and that to fight to address them would help all of us. They were the leaders of this. And go back to like Barbara Jordan's, right, call during the women's conference to find common ground, right, among all these divisions. And so that is something that I think we need to consider about how to reassess how we fight to build unity around these issues that are common to us all, because we all need housing, we all need healthcare, we all need a good education for our children, and we all need better workplace conditions. And so how do we go about doing that? And a lot of times women are leading that struggle.
The question, where do we go from here? Well, first of all, we stand up. Stand up. We speak out. And we vote. And if you're not a volunteer deputy voter registrar, go to harrisvotes.com and go to the registration site and become one. Okay? You got to register. You got to get people to show up, and you got to get people to vote. It's pretty simple. Democracy is actually pretty simple. You just got to do it.
Did anyone else? Okay. We have a good next question here.
Yeah, I was gonna. Yeah, I do. So I would say yes. These are challenging times. That no one's. Yes. However, one of the good things that's coming out of this is that the scholarship continues, right? Folks like Caitlin who are writing books, and books about this history that will be taught in classrooms. Books by, I've got a whole list here. Yeah, my colleague, Maria Cotera, who's coming out with a book. Lara Medina, who writes about the hermanas. Lorena Oropesa, who writes about Enriqueta Vasquez. Diana Espinosa, Maylee Blackwell, who writes about the first Chicana conference. All these books are being taught in classrooms. The work that Sharing Stories does, the work that Chicana Población does on our public sites, these sites are being taught in classrooms. These sites are being taught to very tiny people who are doing history fair projects. So it's getting out there in ways that you can see in this particular group of students coming into UH now who have a confidence, especially the young women, who have this incredible confidence about who they are and what they're going to be and how they're going to live their lives. And that is, for me, that's what gives me hope. And those are the people that I will cultivate on a one-to-one basis, mentoring, working with students, training them in classes, teaching them how to read and critically think about what they're seeing and what they're reading, and how to take in and situate themselves in ways that isn't just about sadness and hopelessness. Because when we stop having joy, everything else doesn't matter. So yeah. No? Okay.
And I'd like to add something to your statement. I'm at the Houston Chronicle, and being in an industry that is majority women, there's still representation issues. There's still equity pay issues. And I will say, it wasn't until our first Black editor, Maria Reeve, who came, I think shortly before the pandemic, she was the one who looked at the salary inequities and decided that to make it right. And so about 15 to 18, mostly journalists of color, including myself, were given significant pay bumps to match their white counterparts. Wow. The last question. Gloria Steinem called the National Women's Conference the most important event nobody knows about. From your perspective, why do you think that this has been overlooked in our national and local memory? And what do you hope people will remember most about the 1977 conference?
I'm deep in writing about this, so sorry. I think that the idea of national public memory, it requires people, and obviously the National Women's Conference had people, and participants are sharing their stories. And there's more room now for all different types of stories, especially in a digital age. But it also requires power. And the national commemorative landscape is centered on men. And that's because men are often the ones who create that. And so they valorize and heroicize and commemorate themselves. And, you know, we need to get beyond a moment of just suffrage statues. Like, there's more than suffrage. And so getting this, if the only statue, I'm not saying there needs to be a statue, but I'm saying, like, in terms of memory, we go to, you know, museums, we look at statues. The only statue of, you know, women that's in the Capitol Rotunda is of suffragists. And so I think, you know, having women be in positions of power where we can create and shape the national public memory and the national landscape. So this moment is remembered, is important, because, you know, it's being, like Linda said, people are learning about it through Chicana Permiraza, through sharing stories, through different types of media, like Mrs. America. There was a show about it, so whether you liked it or not, there's a show about it. Either way, so there's more voices now, but there needs to be more of a collective power to, at the national level, to say, hey, this needs to be remembered. At the local level in Houston, with the exception of places like the Heritage Society, Houston does a really not so great job of remembering its past. It often bills itself as a city of the future, so it's constantly moving forward. So it's demolishing places like the Sam Houston Coliseum. But, you know, there is a plaque to the National Women's Conference that's on the Hobby Center, and that was put there by Mayor Anise Parker, who was a participant in the conference. So a lot of this commemoration has been driven by participants. And I think, you know, new generations, the students who are creating these magazines, the students who are working with projects like Sharing Stories, educators, a new generation really needs to take up this torch at the local and national level to make sure that this moment is remembered.
I didn't hate it. So the very short story I will tell about that particular series is that in the Houston episode, I find out that someone on, I think it was Twitter at the time, said, hey, was it you?
It was me.
Oh, okay. You said, you said, have you seen it? And I'm like, yeah, no, I don't really. It brings up a lot of it because, you know, I'm from Illinois, so the Schlafly, not, okay, that I have trauma about that. And remember my mother's constant reaction to anything Phyllis would do in the state. And so somebody said in that episode, it's Gloria Steinem and Audrey, I think, mm-hmm. and 3 other women, and one of those women is my mother. Mm-hmm. And they said, we think that's your mother because she said, you know, and it was about the minority plan, and they were sitting on the bed, and you don't see the 3 women until they sort of tip the camera around, and then you see these 4 very young women, which was like my first, I'm like, that's not, I'm like, good Lord, that woman looks as young as I was then. And she says all of their names, and one of them is Rhea. And I was like, yeah, that would have been my mother. Yeah. And so that's sort of the odd relationship that we all have to a moment that didn't actually happen like that. and certainly not a double suite, or not a double bedroom almost. So it was a suite where that happened. And because I was there. And so I say that to say, we have, you know, even that series, in its sort of romanticized version of the history of the women's movement, I would say the biggest issue for me in that moment is The 60s has all of this upheaval, but all of these wonderful moments. The 70s has all these wonderful moments, and then we all go careening into the 80s, where a lot of this history begins to die very quickly. And I think that's the big problem, is that it lost all of its oxygen in the 80s and then began to recapture when people start writing about it and remembering it and doing things to remember it. But yeah, I think that the big catalyst there was that right after that, we hit the 80s. So.
I think that we are out of questions. And we're opening up to questions from the audience.
Before we open it up to questions from everyone, I would appreciate it if anyone who was, and I know there are some of you, who were involved with the conference would mind standing so we can recognize you. Also, many of or some at least, of the people who were at the conference have taken part in doing an oral history for sharing stories from 1977. So we have a sign-up sheet, and any of you who are interested in, if you've not done an oral history, if you'd be interested in telling your story, we would love to have you do that. So I'm going to pass this around, and you can sign up if you're asking questions.
People involved with the conference. Yeah. Questions?
Hi, thank you for a great presentation. I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say that the Houston Area Women's Center opened immediately after the 1977 conference because of the 1977 conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Miranda.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I was there and I was 30 years old and already fired up and ready to go, like our wonderful President Obama would say. But I cannot tell you how much it meant to be able to see the great Barbara Jordan in person, who had been the head of the Watergate Commission, and I must say, she would have shut them all down by now. She was still with us. That's not what I was going to say. Anyway, so it was like a massive consciousness raising, and it was put on by the federal government, and it had that stamp, of being so very, very important and led by the federal government. But it was the media that covered it and spread the word, and it inspired women all across the world, really and truly. And so we saw women's shelters, we saw people running for election, we saw people forming all kinds of groups and empowering women that were never empowered before. And we in Houston in 1980 elected the first woman mayor of the city of Houston, our dear Kathy Whitmire. And we had a national women's political caucus, but did not have a Harris County women's political caucus, but we founded it after the conference and then elected many, many wonderful women. So it was the most wonderful.
Hello. Thank you so much for your time and all the information. I am a native Houstonian and a U of H grad, and I didn't know anything about this. I am currently a part of an organization called the National Association of Women Business Owners, and we were instrumental in passing the HR 50/50 bill, which meant in 1989, where we no longer needed a male co-signer to get a loan for our business. So currently, we're working on a lot of other initiatives. And so there are a lot of young people like myself who are marching in the Capitol and advocating for our rights as women business owners. I got to do it for the first time last year, and I did it again this year, and the Texas chapters we're going to the local Capitol in September to talk to our representatives to work on elder care credit, child care credit, AI safety laws, redefining the definition of micro business owners, energy efficiency. So we're working on a lot of things as well. So thank you for, paving the way, and we're working on things too here. So thank you.
Good evening. My name is Graciela Sainz. Everybody knows me by Gracie. And I want to say that you're right. This laid the groundwork for so many individuals to run for office later. The mentors that I had were Olga Solis.
Oh my God, yes.
Right?
Oh my God.
Yolanda Navarro Black.
Yeah.
Right? And Sylvia Garcia.
Yeah.
And all of those ladies were very instrumental in my role when I ran for office as well. And of course, Eleanor Tinsley. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hello, y'all. My name is Kiki Newman. Oh, wow. And to think I was on the sofa earlier, just hanging out. I have a very rich past of being an out, proud LGBT woman who came out 50 years ago before the IWI. And I worked for Lieutenant Governor Bill Hobby at the state capitol, which meant I Xeroxed. But I had a job, and I was around political leaders. So when I came home to Houston after college, there was no question that I was going to continue being a one-on-one person changing the world. Part of that was being at the IWI as an official balloon blower-upper. Yeah. And for 1/2 of a day, because I had very good lungs back then, I blew up the lavender balloons that said, "We are everywhere." I will never forget it. And we marched in to the Coliseum bravely at that time as LGBT women, trans, whatever you want to say. And we held those balloons and we were visible. And I have taken that throughout my life. Be visible. I'd also like to say that that is sort of forgotten. And it was mentioned by this wonderful panel that so much of the history has been forgotten. It's partly my fault. I tend to want to go have a life and do lots of things, and I have not done my oral history. And I just had COVID, so it's on my mind. But I want to say that I am here on the wings of so many strong women who stepped outside the box at the risk of losing their jobs, their relationships, their families, all the relatives all over the country. You would not believe what I had to go through and how I had the next day after the IWI to go to a job and hide again. Mm-hmm. No more. Thank you. I agree with you, Kiki, on a lot of that.
But I also want to mention there are now 2 statues with women in the mall. One is for the women nurse veterans from Vietnam, and that's new. People would say during that whole Vietnam uproar, that there were no women there. Well, there were, and some of them were killed, but they were all nurses. And now there is a statue, so yay.
Yay!
Anybody else have a question?
We got it.
It's just organizing.
Okay. Thank you everyone for turning out tonight. I know I have thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I hope you have too. Our panelists were simply amazing, and I'd like us to give another round of applause to Poppy Northcutt, Linda Garcia Merchant, Josephine Lee, Caitlin Jones, and Joy Sully. Y'all were amazing. I forget how much this crowd loves to clap, and there's nothing wrong with clapping. I'd also like to thank our friends at the Heritage Society, Allison Bell, Anna Trejo, and Jillian Jopling for everything that they did to make tonight happen. Also, deep thanks to Paulina Karmatz and Vince Lee from UH Special Collections for the amazing pop-up exhibit. Also thanks to, well, go ahead. Also thanks to Dean Christina Gola and Associate Dean Lauren Gottlieb Miller from the UH Libraries. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you again to Donna Cole for her support for sharing stories. I know I said it once, but I can't resist saying it again. I miss our Friday afternoon meetings. They were great.
Introduce myself earlier. I'm Debbie Hartwell. I'm the editor of the magazine. Make no mistake, Caitlin was the guest editor for the magazine that you have in your hand. So I want to just offer a couple of other thank yous. I want to thank Dr. Nancy Beth Young and Dr. Leandra Zarno for the fabulous Sharing Stories from 1977 project that they have created for all of us to learn more about this history. I also want to thank the Center for Public History Lecture Series and our team, which includes Nancy Beth Young, one more time, and Wes Jackson, who's our program director, Daniel Killian, who has now has the Now Fellowship and has helped put all of this together also. And to Michael Voss, who's new to our team. And then I want to thank and draw your attention to Maya Bishebel and Miranda Rosinski. And the reason I want you to know who they are is because they've both written articles that are in the magazine. Maya wrote on the logistics of the conference, and Miranda wrote the biography of Sylvia Ortiz, who is here. She stood up a few minutes ago. She was one of the corpse if you didn't recognize her name. So thank you to all of our staff, and thank you all for being here and participating. At the Center for Public History and at the Houston History Magazine, we rely on people like you who generously want to support keeping history alive and supporting the students who are doing that work. So if you like this program this evening and want to continue to support us, please go to our website. It's houstonhistorymagazine.org, and you can support us there by buying magazines, buying subscriptions, getting gift subscriptions, buying back issue, and there's also a donate link there as well if you'd like to give to the Welcome Wilson Houston History Collaborative, which is what we are a part of. And then we have some other options. So back to Nancy.
The Sharing Stories Project is going on and on and on. We're like the Energizer Bunny. We never quit. We are coming in on the 50th anniversary of the National Women's Conference, and it is our ambition to have all of the research completed for the biographies and the delegate demographics, and as much of that work published as possible, but we know we will still be publishing for several years thereafter. And then there are all of those other categories of participants: the journalists, the international dignitaries, the torch relay runners, give it up for runners, et cetera. And we want to write their biographies and tell their stories as well. So we've got a ways to go with this project, and if you like what we're doing and you can, we would very much appreciate your support. You can text NWC77 to 71777 to donate. And I will say that it is through the generous funding from donors who have supported our work that has allowed us to introduce and innovate with the launching of a national editorial board staffed by some of the best graduate students in women's history and women's studies around the country that will begin working next month. We have the funds to run this editorial board for 2 years, but we need to run it for several more years after that. So if you feel the spirit moving you, we would very much appreciate it. But regardless, join us in spreading the story of the National Women's Conference in a moment of optimism and joy for better times to come.